crop disruptions. And so, currently I have about 220 crop disruptions as well as 11 SBA-only declarations. We deploy our teams for those physical as well as economic injury disaster loans. For those economic injury, we work through our partners on the ground to ensure that there's awareness. The disaster administration dollars that we get to make sure we can deploy as extensively as possible is very critical for us, and to ensuring people are aware of these resources that are available on the ground. And we will always continue to try to do a better job working in partnership with locals to ensure that there's awareness of these great resources.
Thank you so much. I just wrap up. The ruggedness situation is important to myself and Senator Capito. We're very concerned because we have a beautiful rugged state. Corridor H is important to connect us to the metropolitan areas, to finish that up, and helping the small businesses that don't qualify for FEMA net. They can't make it without a little bit of assistance. Thank you all. I appreciate your service. Thank you very much.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to those of you who are here today. Just listening to each of our colleagues from around the country talk about the various disasters that have impacted them, whether it is droughts or floods, landslides. Our reality is that what we are seeing is accelerating in terms of not only the types of disasters that we are seeing, but the economic impact, the security impact, and of course the loss of life. I was out in Guam a few weeks ago with Senator Manchin. We're looking to Guam to be this platform for defense for the country, but they're digging out of a typhoon from 2 years, or Marwar, 2 years ago now, I believe it is. Secretary Buttigieg, I appreciate the fact that the Alaska $107 million in the emergency response account addresses Typhoon Merbok, but again, that's a disaster 2 years ago. I think we recognize that we are dealing now, okay, we're talking about Milton, we're talking about Helene, but we still have on the books all of these other disasters that we can name, that we can relate to. And so we've got a system that is it's not keeping up. It does not have the nimbleness. It doesn't have the reflexes that we need. When Senator Coons talks about resilience, and do we need a resilience strategy? I think we need more than that. When we are tasked with, well, okay, here's the funding, here's the response, but there's strings attached to it, and so instead of building back better, it's building back substantially similar. And if you're being threatened by coastal erosion, where the disaster next year is just going to be worse than what you had last year, it doesn't make anybody feel secure in their homes. Today is the 1-year anniversary of a landslide in one of my hometowns, Wrangell, Alaska, where 6 lives were lost, a family of 5, when a landslide came down in a part of the community that nobody anticipated, thought was going to break loose, but it was intense rains combined with winds. And our reality is our lack of preparedness, our lack of being able to monitor, our lack of censoring, our lack of truly understanding our ability to track our weather systems. In all of Southeast, an area that is the size of the state of Florida, I'm told that we have 1 radar. So it's no wonder that we're not able to anticipate what is coming at us and to better protect our communities. The town that I was born in Ketchikan, experienced a deadly landslide just a few months ago. We are talking about small scale, big scale, but whatever it is that is hitting us, your agencies are struggling. Your agencies are overwhelmed, whether you are FEMA or whether it's any one of you. One of the agencies that's not represented at the table today is someone from Commerce. I wanted to ask about why we don't have anybody to talk about the fact that there is no assistance, no disaster assistance for the ongoing fisheries disasters that we are seeing in my part of the country, and Senator Shaheen's and Senator Murray's here. We're told, well, maybe there's going to be another supplemental, but in the meantime, our fishermen, our coastal communities that rely on them are being devastated, just literally taken out at the knees. There are no funds in the Fisheries Resource Disaster Assistance account. There are no funds. And so how we deal with these disasters is very real and very personal to each and every one of us. Let me ask a question, because I've talked more than I need to here, but we have people that are not going to wait for you all to come and help them. Kotzebue just experienced a major flooding. They need to get things secure before winter really, really hits, which it already is. Ice is coming. They're locked in. They've got to spend the money. They can't wait. They can't wait to have Department of Transportation. Again, Secretary, I appreciate that we've got $107 million in that account, the unmet needs account. But how do we cut through the tape to ensure that the aid is not delayed because of this back-end accounting requirement about which the costs are attributable to the agencies? This is a challenge for people. They need to move forward, but they're afraid they're not going to be able to get the reimbursement. Is there some way to embrace something like advanced construction concept for disaster response? I think these are the types of things that we need to be thinking about. My time is out, but if you have a quick answer, answer it. In the meantime, we've all got to be thinking about how we can address what I think is a disaster response system that is not meeting the current state of affairs.
Very briefly, you have my commitment to work within, to do everything as flexibly and swiftly as we can within the statute that we have, and for technical advice on anything that could help create some flexibilities like you mentioned. Things like advanced work have helped on regular construction to not have to wait for all of the obligation machinery to move. Would welcome exploring ways to bring that to bear in Alaska. And having visited Kotzebue last year when I went to Alaska at your invitation, I have some sense of what they're up against. Our field staff on the ground in Alaska will be ready to assist any way they can.
And I would hope that the rest of you on the panel would also agree.
Senator, I would add that if our disaster recovery funds are approved, it will be available for your fisheries.
Yay, best news of the day. Thank you.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to each of you for being here and for the hard work that so many members that everyone in your agencies are doing to help those people affected by these terrible emergencies. Deputy Secretary Torres Small, you had a chance to come to New Hampshire and to talk with some of our farmers. I was interested in Senator Ossoff talking about some of the farmers in Georgia who lost 20 to 30% of their crops. Well, we had fruit growers in New Hampshire, as you know, who lost 80 to 100% of their stone crops. Everything they lost in 2023 because of the freeze and late frost that really devastated so many of our growers. And because we have small farms and about 90% of our growers don't participate in federal crop insurance programs because the crop insurance programs have not really been designed to help farmers like we have in New Hampshire. Senator Collins talked about the same challenges in Maine. So how does the agency estimate accurate losses for states with high rates of small and diversified farms that have limited engagement with the federal programs?
This is an issue that's especially important in New Hampshire, and in my visit and conversations with fruit farmers in New Hampshire certainly saw that the insurance payments, insurance programs don't fully recognize the need, particularly when it comes to specialty crops. So our estimate of the 2023 losses of $10.7 million was based on the known and estimated insurance as well as NAP indemnity payments. And so recognizing that may not be the full and complete picture. We know that there was a cooperative extension estimate that was $26 million.
Right.
So in addition to continuing to work with your team, we also know that we need to expand those insurance programs. NAP is a fundamental way of doing that because it helps build the case for actual insurance programs in the future. We also just recently announced the CCC specialty crop program that'll be $2 billion to provide marketing support and assistance for specialty crops.
So does the estimate that's been sent to this committee for covering losses, farm losses, would it allow for a number that's greater than the 10.7 million that you've determined?
So the first amount is based on the indemnity payments and information that we have there. We also plan, if asked to administer an ERP, there's a second track for revenue losses, and certainly could consider that there.
Because clearly those numbers don't reflect the real losses that we're experiencing in a state like New Hampshire. Administrator Griswold, we have, I would like to add my concerns to what we've heard from a number of members here about the length of time that so many of our small communities are waiting. And I appreciate that there have been so many disasters that it's hard to keep up, but we have communities in New Hampshire going from the Canadian border in the north to the Massachusetts border in the south, every place from Pittsburgh to Ackworth, that have not yet received reimbursements, and they've been waiting for about 2 years. So what can we do to try and move those checks along? As everyone has said, these are small communities. They've been hit hard. They don't have the capacity to cover those kind of rebuilding costs, and they really need to be reimbursed once they've filled out their paperwork, and they need to see those dollars coming in.
Yes, Senator, we understand that these cash flow issues are critical for these small communities. And again, every community has their own specific needs, requirements, and paperwork that we have to have submitted. If you have somebody specific, I'm happy to look into individual cases to see if there's something that we can do to move it along. Part of our changes recently with increasing the dollar threshold on small projects helps to simplify that procedure. But we also have other mechanisms that we can put in place to do advance payments so they don't have to wait for the entire project to be done. If that's something that would benefit, I'd be happy to look into that for your particular communities. But we want to continue to work with you on how do we make this simpler as we continue to see more disasters happening across the United States.
And I think that's very important. These are communities, that's my understanding, have already submitted their paperwork, and they are in compliance. They're just waiting for their checks. It includes Dalton, Ackworth, Hampton, Gorham, Newton, Ossipee, Littleton, Pittsburgh, and Monroe. So it's across the state, and you know, once they've submitted the paperwork, it seems to me that they ought to be able to get the reimbursements.
If they've submitted all of the paperwork, they should have been reimbursed. So I'll look into those personally and see what we can find out.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And since I chair the Small Business Committee, I would just like to add for Administrator Guzman, thank you for all of the work that you're doing. Small businesses, as we know, are the heart of our economy throughout this country, particularly in New Hampshire. And we have, as you pointed out, more than 10,000 homeowners and small business owners with approved loans who are just waiting on our appropriation from this committee and this Congress to get to work rebuilding. So thank you.
Senator Schumer Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank all of you for being here. I know it's been a long morning, but it's critically important. Just as a statement, I'll tell you, I hail from West Virginia. Senator Manchin does as well. I think all of us here I don't want to speak for everybody, but certainly for me, I know if the disaster's not occurring in West Virginia, it's occurring somewhere else, it's going to occur in West Virginia. So I've always been very supportive of making sure that all of our communities across the country are able to get the disaster relief and as quickly as possible. So put me in that category of somebody who knows if not for me, it will be me and it will be us. Administrator Criswell, I would like to thank you for in your opening statement. You mentioned that nobody should be discriminated against for their political affiliations or anything else. And so thank you for reinforcing that policy. It's important. I would say if that particular FEMA employee had come to West Virginia, we wouldn't have gotten much help because we had a lot of Trump signs all throughout our state. So thank you for that. I was going to kind of call you into question on some of the environmental review processes that have been going on. We had a town in West Virginia that has been going over 2 years trying to get this environmental review for something as simple as a generator, a static security camera, or basic pre-disaster mitigation equipment, just the bureaucracies of this. But I was just informed that they got their okay today. So thank you for that. You can take credit for that. On to drought. Well, let me stay with you for a moment, because I was the ranking member and the chair at some point of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Appropriations. This is a perennial problem in terms, but how many, can we help you and help FEMA as an organization take some of these older disasters off of the books, maybe figure out a process where we work with our states and our localities? Obviously, there's going to be a funding issue there, where that causes you so you don't have these backlogs and lags of disasters that are still ongoing while you're trying to face what you see in front of you. What kind of measures do you think would help you do that, and would that be useful?
Senator, I think, we've seen a number of disasters that have been ongoing for many years. I mean, we still have some back to Hurricane Katrina. One of the things that we have started doing is a program that we're calling Validate As You Go. Part of the delay in closing out some of these projects sometimes is after they go through years of gathering the paperwork, doing the rebuild, we do all of the closeout at the very end of the project, and that can be time consuming to go look at every receipt and every action that was taken along the way. We've started to do that periodically and auditing it along the way, so that way it speeds up the process at the end. And we're starting to see real success with implementing this new way of approaching disaster closeout, which we've just started doing over the last few years.
So you're closing out portions of the disaster as you're moving it along?
We are auditing it as we go along, and if we find that they are meeting everything, then we don't have to review every single submission, every receipt at the closeout phase of a project.
Well, it seems to me you could enlist your state and local partners too to be able to help you with some of that work, rather than diverting your workforce who has the immediate needs in these larger disasters. But we want to work to make that process easier so you can close the books and you can move forward. So anything we can do to help in that would be appreciated. I'm going to talk about the drought just briefly, because West Virginia really has been, we don't have a huge ag community, but but just some of the statistics are quite startling. 90% of our soybean crop condition is in poor or very poor condition. 100% of our hay crop is in poor and very poor categories, and 97% of our soybean crop is in, well, I already said that, 97% of our soybean is in poor or near poor conditions. So you all at Ag have been helping us as an office to reach out to our Ag community, so I appreciate that. The last question I have is, apparently NOAA has an artificial intelligence mapping system where they map on the coastlines what could be tracking impervious surfaces of roadway water, runoff, and how inundation modeling can help save lives. But a lot of the country's been left out of this AI modeling. I understand the coastal issues, but describing, as Senator Manchin did, our terrain, we're very prone to flooding. So I don't know, Secretary Buttigieg, are you using similar technology for mapping pre-disaster and water runoff so that you can more accurately see where your vulnerabilities are?
I'm not familiar with that particular program, but we do have a number of partnerships with sister agencies to try to get an understanding of any weather or climate issues that we need to handle. I would segregate that into two very separate types of operations, things like FAA that need immediate real-time information versus what we're doing for the longer term with infrastructure development or response. But happy to follow up and see if we got anything on there.
Well, this is a NOAA program. I don't know if I mentioned that when I began the descriptions of it. And what about Administrator Criswell? Are you all familiar with that AI model that's being used to map?
Yeah, there's a number of models out there. NASA has one. There's several private sector agencies that also have different models. All of these are really important because as we consider the impacts that these communities are facing, what we want to be able to do is help them understand what their future risk is going to be, because we obviously can see that we can't base it on historical risk. And so all of these different types of technologies, and we're trying to incorporate some of our own, but I think as we bring all of this together from the private sector, from NASA, from NOAA, all of those different technologies are going to really help us communicate and help communities understand and know their risks so they can make the appropriate preparatory actions and plans to help protect their citizens.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will say that we just signed a letter into requesting a disaster declaration for West Virginia from Helene. It didn't, it didn't get the news, and it didn't, but that storm and that water really affected all of Appalachia, even into the areas of West Virginia. So I appreciate your attention on that. Thank you all very much.
Senator Van Hollen.
And I want to take this opportunity to thank President Biden and his entire team assembled here at the table. A special thanks to Secretary Buttigieg for all your help immediately on the scene after that disaster. Administrator Guzman, thank you, and the SBA for providing loans to businesses that were impacted. We lost 6 good people that day on the bridge. And I think everybody remembers the scenes of the Dolly, the ship, crashing into the Key Bridge and its collapse. And of course, it collapsed right into the Patapsco River, which is the channel to the Port of Baltimore. So I do want to start by thanking the Unified Command, Secretary Buttigieg, the Army Corps of Engineers, and everybody from the federal level who immediately helped starting to clear that channel, to reopen the port so that thousands of workers could get back to work, and small businesses that had been terribly impacted by the closure of the port would have the relief they needed. And we were able to get that port channel reopened in a very short period of time, relatively speaking. So I want to thank everybody for their role in that. And Secretary Buttigieg, thank you also for mentioning the Key Bridge replacement, right? So we've got the port open. Now we've got to replace the Key Bridge. And I'm really pleased that the President's proposal, $100 billion, includes 100% funding for the Key Bridge. Yes, I heard Senator Collins mention that any insurance or other proceeds that come to the state of Maryland will be deducted from that. Yes, we get that. We understand that. We support that. But it is very important that we get this bridge rebuilt. 35,000 vehicles cross this bridge every day. So you can imagine the congestion and loss of economic opportunity that has been caused and ongoing because this bridge is no longer there. I will say, and I heard Senator Capito talk about how West Virginia had often been hit by natural disasters. Maryland has too, of course, and we've always supported the rest of the country. This has been all for one and one for all. That's been the motto of the state of Maryland. And so we're very much hoping, and we expect our colleagues from around the country to support us in this hour of need. I would point out that when the Minneapolis bridge collapsed back in 2007, it took only 5 days for the Congress to pass and for the President to sign legislation assuring that they would be reimbursed 100% in terms of the cost of replacing the bridge. The House, the Senate, the President within 5 days. We are very grateful that we are already enrolled in the emergency relief program. That covers 90%. But Mr. Secretary, I have 2 questions for you. One is, I know the proposal submitted by the President was not in legislative bill form, but in order for Maryland to secure the 100% change, we're going to need an authorization to do that. And just want to hear from you again that the President supports that. And if you could just talk about how important it is for the entire country to increase the funding for the emergency relief program.
Well, thank you. And yes, to be clear, the President, the administration completely support the 100% cost share, which would require legislation in addition to the funding that is part of the funding that we're asking for today. The total event cost we estimate to be $1.75 billion. The first $60 million went against that in the quick release funding that we turned around right away. That leaves $1.69 billion, less the $350 million that we already know is being recovered from insurance. That leaves 1.34, which is what is included in the supplemental. More broadly, I think that while unique, catastrophic, and we hope something of that type is never to be repeated again, it is a reminder that a single disaster can have a greater than $1 billion price tag. Right now, we have $119.6 million in the entire account, which means we are very much one disaster away from being completely out of funding. And it's why this funding request covers the entire backlog from Helene and Milton to the Francis Scott Key Bridge replacement to dozens of other disasters that we are still paying for in dozens of other states.
Thank you, and I want to thank my colleague and partner, Senator Cardin, and our entire Maryland delegation on a bipartisan basis, Senate and House, has introduced the Bridge Act to ensure that full 100% ultimately, and I thank you and, of course, the President for your support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get into my questions for the witnesses, I want to highlight the importance of funding the Rip and Replace program to protect broadband and telecommunication networks that are being damaged by storms and flooding and other disasters. Right now, broadband companies that are waiting on these dollars must rely on Chinese equipment that poses a threat to our national security, and their hands are tied from procuring new equipment when the network goes down due to damage as a result of storms or disasters. And that's why I believe funding the Rip and Replace shortfall, a bipartisan priority affecting rural broadband in states all across the country, should be a priority as part of this disaster relief package. My first question, though, is for Administrator Criswell. Ma'am, good to see you, Administrator. We work together a lot through my work on Homeland Security. And this year, FEMA announced the second round of awards for the Safeguarding Tomorrow's Revolving Loan Fund, which I created through a law entitled Safeguarding Tomorrow Through Ongoing Risk Mitigation Act, the STORM Act, aptly named. And it allows FEMA to help states and tribal governments set up low-cost revolving loans that funds local governments can get to mitigate their risk. So my question for you, Administrator, is can you discuss why having this tool in our resilience funding toolbox is so important, particularly in light of the disasters that we are seeing across our country now and the increasing frequency?
Yeah, Senator Peters, I really appreciate your leadership in this bill and helping to get this across the finish line, because resilience and building resilience in our communities has never been more important. But what we see is some communities can't come up with the cost share for FEMA mitigation programs or other programs, or if they're using their own funding to seed a project. The STORM Act gives them a revolving loan fund to help start that project or meet a cost share from a mitigation project so they can get this critical work done. These mitigation projects are not inexpensive, and so being able to give them additional resources to help them envision and get these projects off the ground are going to help them in their ability to become stronger and withstand and reduce the impacts from future storms.
Great. Well, thank you. This next question is for all of our witnesses. One of the most persistent complaints about our disaster relief system that I hear is its complexity and its fragmentation. And it makes it very difficult for disaster survivors to navigate and receive the aid that they so desperately need. They are faced when they're the survivor of a tragedy with a house needing housing and food and all sorts of assistance, and yet they need to fill out multiple applications. Every agency has their own application, and you're telling someone who's in a pretty desperate shape, here are the 6 different applications you need to fill out to deal with the 6 different agencies. So I have authored a bill that's gotten through the Senate, the Simplification Act, that says that if you are a victim of this type of disaster, you should just fill out one form. This is pretty common sense. Fill out one form and immediately have all of the folks who can be helpful to you understand the extent of the problem for you, the help that you need, and to be able to deliver that. So basically, it would create a universal disaster application, and I think it's in the best interest of disaster survivors. I will tell you, when I talk about this, how this is popular with the folks, when I talk about this in a public meeting, I usually get applause. A lot of stuff I introduce, I do not get applause for, but this is just common sense, and we need to pass this, and I would like to have each of you tell me if you believe that creating a universal disaster application is indeed in the best interest of the survivors and will facilitate them getting the help that they need, and I know each of you are very anxious to provide, but how do we do it in a more efficient way? We'll start with you, Administrator, and work down the dais.
Thank you, Senator. I think anything we can do to remove the barriers that people are facing to receive assistance helps them on their road to recovery. And so it also gives them the opportunity to apply for the recovery. We find that if they have barriers like applying multiple times, then they will just stop. They will just give up. And so this type of an effort really helps ease that burden and helps them get into all of the programs that they're eligible for.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Senator, if HUD's disaster recovery program is finally authorized, then yes, we will be able to work very closely with our colleagues to make sure it's a seamless experience.
Great. With a universal application. Great.
Senator, thank you for talking about flexibility. It is one of the most important things about disaster response. And I know that USDA has submitted multiple suggestions for how we can increase flexibilities with the authorities we have now. I also appreciate your effort to create more authorities for us to expand those authorities and make it so that on the hardest day of someone's life, they're not having to navigate multiple forms. We'd like to work with you as we address also the back end of that, which is all the computer systems that currently work with our existing applications, because that becomes a whole other side of implementation.
Great.
Senator, the SBA completely supports this concept of no wrong door. I will say that the great news is that earlier this year in March, FEMA and SBA cooperated together, and FEMA took leadership in passing an individual assistance change, which was transformative, which does get applauses, and that is no longer will you be required to fill out SBA's application to get assistance from FEMA. That was traumatic for people who were forced to come to us first, get denied, and then go to FEMA, which caused most of the friction you're referencing. So we're pleased that that no longer is the case. SBA, of course, is in a unique situation in that I support over 231 declarations in addition to the 21 presidential that I coordinate with these agencies with. And so while I support no wrong door, I do not support a control where one agency controls that universal platform. I would prefer a platform that would exist, that there is a back-end solutions across our agencies to ensure a seamless experience for that disaster survivor. And so we're working closely with FEMA right now to try to simplify the data sharing so that we can achieve that. And we'd be happy to provide technical assistance to make sure that that language in the bill doesn't force us to work through one agency on a universal application where we would have no control to make minor changes and have quick flexibility to best meet the needs of our businesses in particular, but of course all the homeowners that we support as well. So we're happy to work with you on this to try to see that through.
Good. Look forward to it. Mr. Secretary.
We are passionate about reducing the number of pages and the number of steps in any of our processes. That's why we've done things like the combined notices of funding opportunity in some of our grant programs. So without knowing all the details of this proposal, we would certainly welcome a chance to work on anything that would help simplify the process at the front end.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Merkley, last but not least, thank you for your patience.
And thank you to the patience of our witnesses. And my question is really to you, Deputy Secretary Torres Small. The estimates that we've received for the damage to infrastructure in the Forest Service is about $6.9 billion, and an additional $3.1 billion for the national parks, the Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM. Is that estimate about in the ballpark of what you've been hearing?
The current submission that we provided to OMB is $5.6 billion for Forest Service, so ballpark, but we should circle back on those numbers.
I think 5.6 was just Hurricane Helene. There is an additional amount in those numbers, about 1.3 for other damage.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So my estimates are about right.
Correct.
So of that roughly $10 billion, and by the way, that what you just referred to, that was just the Forest Service. But then we have the damage to the infrastructure in these other areas, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, BLM. Thus, we end up with about $10 billion of damage. How many billion dollars are in this bill to address all that infrastructure damage on public lands?
So the current request does not include that damage. It acknowledges that there is this outstanding amount and commits to continuing to assess and provide
So the
an
current
update.
request is zero? Okay, 0 out of 10 billion. That's really the point I wanted to drive home. I really think it's completely unacceptable. And possibly you might say to me, or others might say to me, well, there's this mirage on the horizon of a second supplemental. Does anyone really think that that's going to happen? If we have the political will to address these issues, it's going to be addressed in this supplemental. And so I'm encouraging every possible effort. In 2020, Oregon had really horrific damage from catastrophic wildfires. My colleague was describing what happened to Hawaii, if Senator Schatz was, and Senator Padilla could tell you what happened in Paradise, California, and other fires in California. In 2020, we had 6 towns burned to the ground, another 6 deeply damaged. I traveled 600 miles north to south, south to north, never got out of the smoke. The ruins were something like out of a war zone. And the FY22 supplemental helped us. It helps us with the roads and bridges. It helps us remove hazardous fuels. It helped revegetate burned areas. It helped restore water systems. It set the foundation for restoring communities. So thank you to all my colleagues who supported those funds in FY22. But today, the request we have before us ignores the infrastructure on our public lands. And these disasters, hurricanes and wildfires and flash floods and landslides, they do enormous damage, and we need to restore that damage. Hurricane Helene destroyed or damaged 900 miles of roads and bridges in North Carolina's national forests, which the community depends on for day-to-day transportation, emergencies, evacuations. It caused dozens of landslides or rock slides on the Blue Ridge Parkway, gravely damaging the park. It wiped out or damaged more than 40 trestle bridges on the Rails to Trails Virginia Creeper Trail, a major economic driver in the southwest part of the state. Dozens of other national parks, wildlife refuges, national forests suffered damages from the disasters over the last 2 years. Damage in Yosemite and Sequoia and Kings Canyon, Acadia, Death Valley, Okefenokee Wildlife Refuge. We have a long history of caring for our public lands. It's carried in the heart of every American, but this bill fails to honor that responsibility. Now, I was thinking back how in FY22 supplemental, we immediately addressed the almost $1 billion of damage in Yellowstone. People will remember the videos of houses falling into the river and floating down and kind of key access, and we did the right thing. We helped address the road system, the water system. That's what we need to be doing now on this. If folks don't have a picture of what I'm talking about buildings, roads, trestles, bridges, the communication systems, the water systems, the recreation sites, the research sites, and the trails. We must not say that it's okay to have that devastation sit there unaddressed. Thank you.
Thank you. That will conclude our hearing for today, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for this really critical discussion. As is clear, people are hurting, and it is crucial that we get them the help they need by passing a bipartisan disaster supplemental. I will continue to work with Vice Chair Collins and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to get that done and to wrap up our FY25 spending bills in a bipartisan way, consistent with our Senate bills. So for any senators who wish to ask additional questions for the record will be due in 7 days, Wednesday, November 27th by 5 p.m. That committee stands adjourned.
This afternoon, Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra will testify on his department's Office of Refugee Resettlement and will likely face questions on the fast-track release of unaccompanied children and safety concerns. From the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration Security and Enforcement, watch live at 2 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3. C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or online at cspan.org.
C-SPAN is your unfiltered view of government. We're funded by these television companies and more, including Comcast.
Oh, you think this is just a community center? No, it's way more than that. Comcast is partnering with 1,000 community centers to create Wi-Fi-enabled lift zones so students from low-income families can get the tools they need to be ready for anything.
Comcast supports C-SPAN as a public service, along with these other television providers, giving you a front row seat to democracy.
Welcome back. We're joined now by Orrin Cass, who's the founder and chief economist at American Compass. Welcome to Washington Journal.
Well, thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your mission at American Compass and how your organization is funded?
Sure. Our mission directly is to restore an economic consensus that emphasizes the importance of family, community, and industry to the nation's liberty and prosperity. So what that means in practice is really focusing a lot on economic policy, trying to get away from this model that just says all growth is equally good and we'll somehow make it up to everybody who gets left behind, making sure it's a much more broad-based growth. And as a result, we're funded by a really interesting set of some individuals, some corporations, and a lot of foundations all the way across the political spectrum.
Speaking of the political spectrum, where would you say that your group sits in terms of ideology in politics as well as economics?
Well, we're definitely on the right of center. I think we're clearly identified as a very conservative group. But at the same time, it's interesting. We spend most of our time on arguments within the right of center, really working on a lot of these fights that are going on among conservatives about how to move forward. Obviously, the Republican Party today is not the same one of John McCain and Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan. And so, we work a lot with folks like now Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, now nominee for Secretary of State Marco Rubio on trying to shape the future direction of the conservative movement.
You had an op-ed in the New York Times, or a guest essay, I should say. Trump is about to face the choice that dooms many presidency. What is that choice, and why did you need to write this now?
Well, I think it's an especially interesting situation for Mr. Trump because, it's been 100, almost 150 years since we've had a president who was out of office and then coming back into office. So he kind of gets a second chance at doing a first term. And, typically what we see when a new president is coming in, they've just spent all of this time campaigning, making commitments to voters, trying to win their support. And all of a sudden, everything flips. Now you're the president-elect. Now all of those special interest groups, all of those donors, everybody's trying to get your support for their own priorities. And I think it's a place where, right at the beginning, we typically see administrations really struggle, where they do a lot of the stuff that the activists really want, that the donors really want, and the voters kind of look around and say, wait a minute, this isn't what we were expecting at all. And typically then in the next midterm election, you see the president's party get wiped out. And so, I think the point of the piece that I wrote and what is such an important moment right now is to see, can Mr. Trump remember why it is he was actually elected, what he's going to have to do to be a successful president, or does all of the attention, focus to what people are talking about at the bar at Mar-a-Lago, which isn't the stuff that's going to get it done.
Now, when it comes to Trump's first administration, how close do you think he got to some of these pro-worker economic policies that you support? And in general, what did you think of his economic record?
Well, I think his first term was a really interesting situation where, I like the metaphor of the dog that caught the car. Obviously, people were very surprised that he won, and it was a situation where there hadn't been a lot of work done to develop the kinds of policy ideas, to develop the bench of talent that you could bring into an administration that was going to do that kind of work. And so what I think you really saw in his first term was, he gets to the White House, who's in Congress? Well, Paul Ryan is the Speaker of the House. And so what are the big legislative priorities? It was a big corporate tax cut, and it was trying to repeal Obamacare. And I think those probably weren't the right places to focus. On the other hand, in places where a lot of thinking and work had already been done in terms of stronger immigration enforcement, in terms of much more aggressive trade policy and confronting China, that's where you saw him get more done. And I think especially on trade, Ambassador Bob Lighthizer, who was U.S. Trade Representative, who's a candidate for Treasury Secretary now, he knew exactly what needed to be done. Trump gave him the power and the space to go do it. And so I think we made a tremendous amount of progress on the trade issue with China.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you're working with Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. I want to play a portion of his speech accepting the vice presidential nomination in July.
Never in my wildest imagination could I have believed that I'd be standing here tonight. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. A small town where people spoke their minds, built with their hands, and loved their God, their family, their community, and their country with their whole hearts. But it was also a place that had been cast aside and forgotten by America's ruling class in Washington. When I was in the 4th grade, a career politician by the name of Joe Biden supported NAFTA, a bad trade deal that sent countless good jobs to Mexico.